Masterbox NR200 from Cooler Master. Now this is the first ITX case I've tested, or even built in for that matter. So please, don't be too hard on me. What's up everyone, Eric here and welcome to Hardware for Gamers. For those of you new to the channel, I review and test PC cases, CPU coolers, and PC case fans. Now before I get into the overview, I want to have full disclosure. I bought this case myself to test and review, so if you end up liking this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel because it does help a lot. I'll be starting the overview with a quick rundown of the NR lineup from Cooler Master. The NR lineup is Cooler Master's Airflow Focus series. There is the NR200 or 200P. This is the smallest case in the NR lineup at only 18.25 liters. Next up is the NR400. This is a micro ATX mini tower case, and it has an optical disk drive option and a non-optical disk drive option. The mid-tower case is the NR600, and like the NR400, this does also have an optical disk drive option and a non-optical disk drive option. Finally, there's the NR600P, which is meant for workstations and or servers. Okay then, now that we know all about the NR lineup, let's get into the NR200P. The dimensions of the NR200P are 29.4 centimeters high by 18.5 centimeters wide by 37.6 centimeters deep. The NR200P comes with a large accessory box. This box has all the screws and fittings in it. There are also some zip ties, the two stock fans, a PCI 3.0 riser cable, and a 3-way fan splitter. There is also a manual. This manual is double-sided and does show a lot about the case, but it doesn't explain things very well. So I guess it's a good starting point, but you will need to figure out a few things on your own. Okay, looking at the case, the NR200P has a steel front panel. This panel can be easily removed by pulling the bottom of the panel away from the chassis. The front I/O is not attached to the front panel, so there's no need to worry about damaging any of the cables when removing the front panel. Taking a closer look at the panel, there is no air intake on this panel. The panel is held in by plastic clips that snap into the metal nubs on the chassis. Now looking back at the chassis, we see the front I/O cables and room for 2 SSDs. Along the top of the case, we see the front I/O. There is a combo port for the front audio out and microphone. There are 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports, as well as a restart and power button. The top of the case is also a panel. This panel is held in by plastic nubs, so simply lift the panel up to remove it. The front I/O is attached to the chassis, so there's no need to worry about damaging the cables when removing the panel. This panel is plastic with a metal mesh insert. This metal mesh insert is supposed to act like a dust filter. Taking a look at the back of the panel, we see mounting holes for the 2 stock fans. Moving to the rear of the case, we see the rear I/O location, 3 horizontal and 2 vertical expansion slots, all with reusable covers. And that's it for the rear of the case, so onto the bottom of the case. There are 4 plastic feet. These feet give 20 millimeters of ventilation. The feet do have rubber pads on them to help stop the case from sliding around. There is also a magnetic dust filter along the bottom of the case, but to access this filter you will need to tilt the case. Moving to the right side of the case, there is a steel side panel with round ventilation holes. This side panel is completely toolless. It's held in by 2 metal nubs on the panel that snap into the chassis. To remove the right side panel, you need to pry the top of the panel away from the chassis, then tilt the panel back and lift it away. The inside of the panel is fitted with a dust filter. Moving to the left side of the case, the NR200P's stock configuration has the left side panel the same as the right side panel, and it's removed in the same way as well. But Cooler Master does also include a tempered glass side panel. Like the metal side panel, this glass panel is toolless. To install the glass panel, simply align the bottom rail on the panel to the chassis and tilt the panel up and clip it into place. I'm not sure how well the camera is picking this up, but this glass panel does have a slight tint to it. Finally, the bottom of the case can also be removed. You'll need to remove 1 screw at the rear of the case, then pry the rear of the bottom panel away from the chassis. So by removing all the panels on the case, you will get nearly 360 degrees of access while building in the case. Well, that's the exterior of the case. Now, before I get into the interior of the case, if you like what I'm doing here, can you please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel? And if you really like what I'm doing here, can you please support the channel by using the Amazon Associates links in the description. All you need to do is click on the link that suits your area and then add an item or items to your cart and order them. And by doing this, the channel will get a small kickback at no extra cost to you. Okay, with that out of the way, looking at the inside of the case. On the left side of the case, there is a fan/hard drive bracket. You remove this bracket by unscrewing 2 screws on the rear side of the case. This bracket can hold 2 120mm or 2 140mm fans, or 1 120mm fan and a hard drive. Moving on to the motherboard tray, there's not too much going on here. There's mounting for an ITX motherboard and a mount for the power supply. This power supply mount does have 3 mounting locations, 2 on the motherboard tray and 1 behind the front panel. There are 4 Velcro straps on this power supply mount. It is also possible to mount 1 SSD or 1 hard drive to this power supply mount. Something else really cool, it's actually really easy to remove the support rails, so when you're building in the case, there's just less in your way. Now, if you want to remove the support rails, unscrew the 4 screws fastening the support rail to the chassis, then you can just lift the rail out. The NR200P supports only mini ITX motherboards. With the power supply on the motherboard tray, the maximum GPU length is 330mm. With the power supply on the front, the maximum GPU length is 260mm. And with the GPU installed horizontally, the max CPU cooler height is 155mm. Then with the GPU installed vertically, the maximum CPU cooler height is 76mm. Okay, turning the case around to look at the back side of the motherboard tray. The cutout on the motherboard tray should be large enough to access the M.2 on the back of your motherboard, assuming your motherboard has an M.2 on the back of the motherboard. So with the exclusion of any M.2 drives, this case can support up to 4 drives. So that's up to 3 2.5-inch drives and 1 3.5-inch drive, or 2 and 2. Okay, now for the cooling options of the NR200P, its stock configuration has 2 120mm fans. These fans are meant to be mounted or installed on the top panel. These fans do have a 4-pin fan connector. But depending on how you want to configure this case, this chassis can support up to 6 120mm fans. So that's 2 fans along the top, 2 fans along the bottom, and 2 fans along the side. And again, depending on how you want to set up the configuration of this case, you can have up to 2 140mm fans, and that's 2 fans along that side bracket. Okay, for radiator support, you can have up to a 240mm radiator along the side, or a 240mm along the bottom. Okay, that's it for the overview, but before I get onto my build notes, if you are finding this video helpful, you can check out some of my other case reviews. I'll link a card above to the playlist, and I'll also have it linked down in the description. Okay, now for my build notes, and there's a lot of them for this case. Cooler Master does say the NR200P supports SFX and SFXL power supplies, and I guess that isn't a lie, but there are a few asterisks for using an SFXL power supply. First, when I tried using the SFXL power supply mounting location with the stock fans installed on the top panel, I couldn't actually clip the top panel in. And this was because the AC plug that plugs into the power supply was interfering with the fan's grill to the point that I couldn't even push it down and get it in. Now, I even tried spinning the power supply to see if that would actually work, and it didn't. So at least for this power supply that I use, I would either have to choose to move the power supply or not have the fan in the stock location. So for my testing, I chose to move the power supply. So I moved the SFXL power supply to the SFX power supply location, and to no surprise, it didn't work either. It ended up interfering with the actual video card mounted in the horizontal positions. And since I wanted to test the case with the video card mounted both horizontally and vertically, this mounting location doesn't work for me either. Next, I tried mounting the power supply to the front of the case. Now, I did get it to work with some cable management or cable routing, but it did just barely fit because of the length of my video card to how much room you actually have. There was like 1 or 2 millimeters left. So the moral of the story is, if you want this case, use an SFX power supply. And it was actually pretty easy to build in this case, thanks to the ability to remove all the panels and remove the side rails and everything. That actually did make it really easy to build in. Now for cable management, I didn't really have too much issue running the cables. It did all work. Now they do have those Velcro straps, but like things are so tight in the case, using the Velcro straps is extremely difficult. And because I had to have the power supply on the front of the case, some of the cables were like stretched to the max, so I couldn't even put them in the Velcro straps. So yeah, cable management in this one isn't great. Now about the pre-installed or the included fans, because they don't actually come installed, which is interesting. They are both sickle flow fans with a max rated RPM of 1850 and a minimum rated RPM of 650. They have 7 blades. It is a rifle bearing, and as I said before, it is a PWM 4-pin connector, and there is a 2-year warranty on the fans. Now these fans do come pre-installed with the grill and a clipping mechanism on how you get them onto the front panel. I did also check the actual RPMs of these fans that I got. So at 100% PWM, the fan's RPM was 1840-ish. And at 0% PWM, the RPM was about 645-ish. And I guess that's it for my build notes, so on to the temperature testing. Now I did test the NR200P with the video card both mounted horizontally and vertically. Alignment, configuration, however you want to look at that. So we should get a pretty good idea on how this case works with both configurations or alignments or whatever word you want to use. Now, if you do have any questions on how I test the cases, please check out my case testing methodology video. I'll have a card above and I'll also have it linked down in the description. Starting with the CPU workload testing, with the video card mounted vertically and the stock fans running at full speed, the average CPU temperature was 65.6 C, with both the tempered glass panel and the ventilated metal panel. Then with the video card mounted horizontally and the stock fans running at 35 dBA, the average CPU temperature went down to 62.3 C, and again that's with both the tempered glass side panel and the ventilated metal panel. Then with the video card mounted horizontally and the stock fans running at full speed, the average CPU temperature was 61.9 C with the ventilated metal panel and 61.2 C with the tempered glass panel. So all in all, in the CPU workload testing, it didn't really matter which panel you used. It does matter on the alignment of the video card, but not with which panel you use. Now looking at the game testing, and this was not what I expected to see when testing the case, but with the ventilated metal panel, the video card mounted horizontally, and the stock fan running at 35 dBA, the average CPU temperature was 37 C, and the average GPU temperature was 72.2 C. Then again with the ventilated metal panel, the video card mounted horizontally, and the stock fans, this time running at full speed, had the average CPU temperature at 36.5 C, and the average GPU temperature at 70.9 C. Then with the tempered glass panel, the video card mounted horizontally and the stock fans running at full speed, the average CPU temperature was 34.9 C, and the average GPU temperature was 69.4 C. So just to note, this configuration does have the lowest CPU temperature in the game testing. Then with the tempered glass panel, the video card mounted horizontally, and the stock fans running at 35 dBA, the average CPU temperature was 36.3 C, and the average GPU temperature was 69.1 C. Then with the tempered glass panel, the video card mounted horizontally, but the stock fans running at full speed, the average CPU temperature was 35.9 C, and the average GPU temperature was 66.8 C. Finally, with the ventilated metal panel, the video card mounted vertically, and the stock fans running at full speed, the average CPU temperature was 36.9 C, and the average GPU temperature was 62.2 C. So the lowest GPU temperature, but tied for the highest CPU temperature. Now the CPU temperatures didn't really change all that much between all these tests, but the GPU temperature did. Now 72 C is pretty okay for the most part, so you should be able to go with whatever configuration you prefer. Okay then, when comparing the NR200P stock configuration to all the other cases I've tested, starting with the sound levels. Now the interesting thing is I actually tested the tempered glass panel and the ventilated metal panel, and the tempered glass panel was nearly a full dBA louder. Then in the CPU workload test, the NR200 performed pretty much the same as the Alta G1M, with the video card mounted horizontally, and noticeably worse with the video card mounted vertically. In the game testing, the NR200 with its stock fans performed better than the Alta G1M in its stock configuration did. Moving along to noise equalize testing. So all the cases have been noise equalized to 35 dBA. In the CPU workload test, the NR200 performed well, topping this very short list. For the noise equalized game testing, the NR200 again performed pretty well relative to the Alta G1M. So what do I think of the Masterbox NR200P from Cooler Master? Simply put, it's a very well engineered micro ITX case, and despite its compact shape, thermally it still performs really well. Based on my temperature testing, it performed well with both the tempered glass side panel and the ventilated metal panel with just the stock fans. Now this was with negative pressure, and I do understand negative pressure could mean more dust buildup, but this case is very well filtered, so I don't see that as being a big deal. However, if you prefer to set up the NR200P in a positive or even pressure configuration, just understand your results may vary. The temperatures won't necessarily be as good. Now, to anyone looking to buy this case, I do highly recommend going with an SFX power supply over an FSXL power supply, and that's to minimize any compatibility issues with the size of the case. Now, on a personal note, I just wanted to say having the video card mounted vertically in this case looks really weird to me. And that's because there's so much void space or empty space along the bottom. Now, this likely could be offset by having some fans or a radiator installed along the bottom, but I definitely do not recommend installing an AIO along the bottom because that's the start of a whole different issue. Well, that's all I got for this one. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're still watching and you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. There's also the HFG Discord server. There's a link down in the description to it. I post all the charts of all my tests to the HFG Discord server, so it's a pretty good place to get the most updated information. And as always, thank you for watching, and see you next time.